CBSN. President Trump is backing away from Alabama's near total ban on abortion, which the state passed last week.
In a tweet over the weekend, the president suggested that the law may go too far. Jan Crawford explains why President Trump is weighing in now.
Well, I mean, some White House advisors are worried that these restrictive state abortion laws are making Republicans seem extreme and could galvanize women and Democrats. And so President Trump's tweets are basically telling state officials who may be considering laws like Alabama with no exceptions for rape or incest to tone it down. A White House official told CBS News the president respects states' rights, but he would not assign that Alabama law. And other top Republican leaders also have distanced themselves from the law, saying it doesn't have those exceptions for rape and incest. Now, keep in mind, Alabama lawmakers said they wrote that law solely to challenge Roe versus Wade in this newly conservative Supreme Court, but it probably won't ever even get there. It's so extreme, so at odds with Supreme Court precedent that the lower courts are likely to strike it down first. But there are several other less restrictive abortion cases that could reach the court this year, and that, of course, would have a decision coming right in the middle of the 2020 campaign. Anne-Marie and Vlad.
All right, Jan, thank you very much. CBS News legal analyst Kim Wehle is in Washington to talk about this. All right, Kim, so we were just talking about it earlier. Could President Trump's tweets on abortion affect the movement in conservative states to restrict abortion rights?
That's difficult to tell. I think he is walking a fine line in that he does not want to be aligned with the far right for perhaps for purposes of his own presidential campaign. I mean, if Roe versus Wade is overturned, I think what people don't understand is it does not mean abortion rights will go away. What it means is abortion rights will be a state-by-state prospect. So I think the president might be saying, listen, states, you do what you want to do, but me, American public, don't lump me into that far, far extreme version of abortion. I'm still pro-life, but not on that extreme end. You can still vote for me and not be comfortable with what Alabama did.
So let's talk about this Alabama law. It's passed on the state level, but what's the likelihood of it surviving and not being struck down by a lower court?
I think it will be struck down by a lower court, and that's because the current law for abortion, with respect to abortion, the Supreme Court has recognized a constitutional right to privacy that protects women's rights to an abortion. So there is a constitutional protection for abortion. But in a later case after Roe, in a case called Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1992, the court said, listen, you can tinker with that right. You can balance that against the rights of an unborn child. And so you can put restrictions on that. So long as the restrictions are not an undue burden, they're good to go. And I think under any measure, a full-out ban, even for rape and incest, is an undue burden. It would violate even that sort of balancing test. So that doesn't mean the Supreme Court couldn't take it. It'll make its way all the way up to the appeals court. Presumably, it'll be upheld. The ban, striking it down, will be upheld. The Supreme Court could decide to take that case. It's theoretically possible. And I think if the court were to take the Alabama case, we all have to think long and hard about whether Roe versus Wade has any future in this country.
You know, Kim, it's so fascinating to me because when Justice Kavanaugh was appointed to the bench, there were a lot of legal analysts who said that we were going to start to see what we're seeing right now happening in some states. States testing whether or not they could get restrictive abortion laws passed in their legislatures and then see where they end up on the Supreme Court docket. Are we going to continue to see more and more states testing the court because the goal ultimately is to get Roe versus Wade overturned? And so if you get 20 states in the union who have these restrictive abortion laws, does it really matter what the law of the land is? Because in certain states you won't be able to have them.
Yeah, so there's two ways of getting at Roe. I think the Alabama law gets to the core of Roe, basically says, if you're going to, it's either or. You uphold Alabama or you uphold Roe. The rest of these laws are sort of chipping away at Roe and saying, we're going to put this restriction on abortion, we're going to make a heartbeat law, or parental consent, or spousal consent, or, the person has to have admitting privileges in the hospital before they do abortion. Basically, hurdles to abortions. And then the question is that an undue burden? As I mentioned, that's really the test. You can put restrictions on the abortion so long as the burden is not undue. But as a practical matter, all of these restrictions could amount to essentially lack of access to abortion, particularly for low-income women. People with money, people with the ability to travel can go to a state where abortions are free and there's access. It's single moms, minority populations, low-income women, and low-income children who might be pregnant who can't travel and then would have to carry babies to term, whether it's a full-out ban or whether just the restrictions make it pragmatically impossible to have access to an abortion. Those are the people that are going to be affected one way or the other.
You know, whenever we have this conversation, we always sort of drag out polls, and there's any number of polls out there that indicate that at least the majority of Americans are in favor of some sort of right to choose, some sort of options available. And, you know, prior to maybe just a few months ago, before all of these restrictive laws started popping up in the different states, I don't think abortion was sort of a central issue for the 2020 election, but it certainly looks like it's shaping up to be that now.
Well, the shot across the bow in Alabama was a really, really strong message that the anti-abortion contingent of the country thinks that they have more power, I think, to make changes legally than ever. And, you know, if that were to come to the court and the court were to reverse Roe versus Wade, then it would go to the states and it would go to voters. I mean, the midterm elections, we had, I think, 49% turnout in 2018 for the midterms. 51% of Americans did not vote. And so if in that 51% are people that care strongly about abortions one way or the other, what could happen is this whole debate goes back to the polls, goes back to a state-by-state referendum on women's rights and abortion rights in individual states, and it takes it out of the national conversation. So all this, a reversal of Roe would mean the Constitution is not going to weigh in one way or the other. It'll matter to the states, and we could see, I don't know, but we could see a significant shift in how people get to the polls, who goes to the polls, and how they vote if the fear is that abortion could go away in the United States.
All right. Kim, thank you so much.
Sure.